Two bicycle empires, a combined 130 years, and as of this week, only one still has a solvent parent company. Schwinn sold 1 in 4 bikes in America. Raleigh shipped 4 million a year. The connection between their most famous models starts with one borrowed idea. 1887. 12 workers in a Nottingham backstreet workshop built 3 bicycles a week. Within 4 years, a businessman named Frank Bowden bought that operation, moved it to a 5-story former lace factory, and scaled production to 3,000 bikes a year. That workshop sat on Raleigh Street, and the name stuck. Bowden registered the Raleigh Cycle Company in 1889 and had a vision far beyond England. By 1913, Raleigh was the largest bicycle manufacturer in the world. 8 years after that Nottingham workshop opened, and 4,000 miles west, a German-born mechanical engineer named Ignaz Schwinn partnered with Adolf Arnold to start a bicycle factory in Chicago. Arnold, Schwinn and Company bet on precision and scale. They used the latest machinery, branded their output World Cycles, and marketed every frame as the finest available. By 1914, the Chicago operation controlled more than a quarter of the American bicycle market. Both companies ran the same playbook. Build the best product available, keep everything in-house, control every step from raw material to finished frame. Raleigh acquired the Sturmey Archer Gear Company in 1903, giving every affordable roadster a 3-speed hub gear system that worked without cables or derailleurs. Schwinn electro-forged its own frames, built its own wheels, and manufactured everything from tires to saddles under one roof. Both operations grew at a pace that the rest of the industry could not match. By the 1920s, Raleigh was producing 100,000 bicycles a year and had added motorcycle and gearbox manufacturing to the Nottingham output. Schwinn, meanwhile, had survived the first bicycle boom's bust by buying out smaller competitors and briefly entering the motorcycle business through its Excelsior Henderson division before the Depression killed that venture. That vertical control created something neither founder anticipated. Not just market dominance, but cultural identity. A Schwinn was not simply a bicycle in America, it was the bicycle. A Raleigh was not simply a ride in Britain, it was a rite of passage. And what happened in the decades that followed would prove just how powerful and how fragile that kind of identity really was. The Golden Age. By the 1950s, 1 in every 4 bicycles sold in the United States carried the Schwinn name. The company had survived 2 world wars, a depression, and a motorcycle venture that nearly bankrupted it. What saved the brand was a decision to abandon department stores and sell exclusively through a network of authorized Schwinn dealers. Those dealers became the backbone of American cycling retail, and the exclusivity gave the brand an air of quality that mass-market competitors could not touch. Across the Atlantic, Raleigh was scaling at a pace that dwarfed anything happening in the American market. After swallowing rival brands Triumph, BSA, Phillips, and Hercules through a series of acquisitions in the 1950s, Raleigh controlled 80% of British bicycle production by 1960. The Nottingham factory alone covered 75 acres. At its peak, the company employed more than 12,000 people. Annual output across all plants reached 4.2 million bicycles, shipped to 144 countries. Over 75% of production went to export markets. But both empires shared the same structural flaw. They believed the way they had always built bicycles was the only way to build bicycles. Schwinn's frames were overbuilt, heavy, and welded using a proprietary electroforging process that no other manufacturer adopted because no other manufacturer saw the point. The Schwinn Varsity, which became the most widely sold derailleur-equipped bicycle of all time, with nearly 2 million units, weighed 38 pounds. A comparable Japanese or Italian 10-speed weighed 24. Riders noticed. Raleigh's factories were equally locked into the past. The company relied on decades-old tooling and production methods that made a fast pivot into lightweight road racing bikes almost impossible at the scale Raleigh operated. When the mountain bike revolution exploded in the early 1980s, Raleigh was still structured around 3-speed commuters and children's bikes. Both companies were still winning the race they had always run. But the market had quietly started running a different one. Schwinn had its Paramount, a hand-built racing frame that lost money on every unit sold. Raleigh had its professional-grade bikes built with Reynolds 531 tubing at the Ilkeston plant, frames good enough to carry Jupp Zoetemelk to victory at the 1980 Tour de France aboard a TY Raleigh. Both brands could build world-class machines. Neither could figure out how to make the economics of those machines work at scale. What kept both names alive through those years was never the engineering. It was the culture. And two bicycles about to arrive would define that culture for generations. If deep dives into the stories behind cycling's biggest names are worth the time, subscribing is the way to see more of them. What comes next is the part of this rivalry that brand loyalists on both sides tend to skip over: the icons. 42,000 units sold in a single year. That was the debut figure for a bicycle nobody at the Chicago factory expected to succeed. In 1963, a Schwinn executive named Al Fritz noticed something happening in Southern California. Kids were taking small-wheeled children's bikes, ripping off the fenders, swapping in banana seats and high-rise handlebars, and turning them into stripped-down, wheelie-ready machines. Fritz convinced the Schwinn brass to build a factory version. They called it the Stingray. Everything about the Stingray made parents nervous and children obsessed. High-rise ape-hanger handlebars, a long padded banana seat, a fat rear slick tire, a stick-shift gear lever mounted on the top tube like a muscle car. By the late 1960s, Schwinn could not manufacture Stingrays fast enough to meet demand. The Crate series followed, with names like Apple Crate, Orange Crate, and Lemon Peeler, and pushed the concept into collector territory. When kids in Southern California started racing modified Stingrays on dirt tracks, they did not know they were inventing BMX, but they were. Here is where the borrowed idea enters the story. Raleigh saw the Stingray's dominance in America and understood they needed an answer for British children. Their designers studied what Schwinn had built, took the high-rise concept, and pushed it further. The result arrived in North America in 1969 and in the United Kingdom in 1970, priced at £34 and 19 shillings. The Raleigh Chopper, mismatched wheel sizes with a small front and a large rear. A chromed roll bar, ape-hanger bars that looked like they belonged on a motorcycle, a long dragster saddle with a padded backrest, and a gear selector console mounted on the top tube, shifted with a lever that felt like it controlled a real car. The advertising copy sounded more like Detroit than Nottingham. Raleigh sold it as a wild new fun bike, and it sold 1.5 million units. For an entire generation, the Chopper was the first bicycle that felt dangerous and looked rebellious at the same time. That single exchange captures the entire relationship between these two brands. Not competitors in any direct commercial sense, not fighting for the same customers, but mirror images, reflecting the same story in two different countries, acting on the same instincts, and eventually falling into the same traps. Now, into the second half, and this is where the story turns. The collapse. 1,800 workers lost their jobs in a single day. In 1983, Schwinn shut down its Chicago factory permanently. The plant had become a relic, outdated and fire-prone, incapable of producing the lightweight bikes consumers now demanded. The numbers told the whole story. The total cost of parts alone for a Schwinn Varsity built in the United States came to around $70. A Taiwanese manufacturer could deliver the entire finished bicycle, assembled, boxed, and shipped for the same price. There was no amount of brand loyalty that could bridge that gap. The Schwinn family held on for 9 more years, but it was a controlled collapse. In 1992, under 4th-generation owner Ed Schwinn, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. A Chicago-based venture capital firm called Zell Chilmark bought what remained for $40 million. 4 years later, a second ownership group merged the Schwinn name with GT Bicycles. That merged entity went bankrupt again in 2001. Pacific Cycle acquired the wreckage and pivoted the brand straight into Walmart and Target. Raleigh's decline moved slower, but arrived at the same destination. Tube Investments sold the company to Derby International in 1987, after 3 consecutive years of losses. Derby was followed by a management buyout that created Raleigh Cycle Limited. Through it all, the Nottingham workforce shrank from over 12,000 to a few hundred. The lease on the historic factory expired in 2003, and manufacturing left England entirely in 2002, ending 115 years of continuous production. The 75-acre site eventually became part of a university campus. What remained of the brand was sold to Dutch firm Axel Group in 2012 for $100 million, and production shifted to Asia, where manufacturing costs dropped by 25% overnight. Both collapses followed an identical pattern: a stubborn refusal to adapt to global manufacturing realities, a deeply held belief that brand loyalty alone could outlast any decline in product quality, and a string of ownership changes that traded long-term brand health for short-term financial engineering. The destination, in both cases, was exactly the same. The uncomfortable truth: 0. That is the number of bicycles either Schwinn or Raleigh manufactures in their home country in 2026. Schwinn bicycles are managed by Pacific Cycle out of Madison, Wisconsin, manufactured almost entirely in Asia, and sold through Walmart and Target. The brand is owned by Pawn Holdings, a privately held Dutch conglomerate that acquired Schwinn, Cannondale, GT, and Mongoose from Doral Industries in January 2022 for $810 million. The Schwinn name now sits in the same corporate portfolio as Cervelo, Santa Cruz, and Gazelle. Raleigh's head office relocated to Eastwood, Nottinghamshire in 2024. Under Axel's ownership, the brand shifted its focus to electric bikes. Design still happens in England. Manufacturing does not. The bicycles are built in Asia and at factories in Hungary, where production costs run 30% below what the older Dutch plants once charged. The truth that most riders on both sides refuse to acknowledge is blunt. A Schwinn purchased at Walmart in 2026 has no engineering connection to the bikes that Al Fritz designed in Chicago. A Raleigh bought online today has no manufacturing link to the factory that once employed 12,000 workers in Nottingham. Both are licensing operations. The name on the down tube is a marketing asset attached to a corporate balance sheet, not a statement of origin or craftsmanship. That does not automatically mean the bikes are bad. Many are competent, affordable, perfectly functional entry-level machines. But the emotional weight riders attached to these names, the nostalgia, the loyalty, the heated online arguments about which one is better, all of it is directed at companies that no longer exist in any meaningful operational form. The final chapter: 1.8 billion euros. That is what private equity firm KKR paid for Raleigh's parent company Axel Group in 2022. The thesis was straightforward. The pandemic had pushed cycling into a permanent upswing. Urban mobility was shifting. E-bike adoption curves pointed in one direction. Governments across Europe were subsidizing two-wheeled transport as climate policy. On paper, it looked like a generational bet. That bet collapsed. On August 6, 2026, Axel Group announced insolvency proceedings in the Netherlands. The company stated it had explored every possible avenue and exhausted all options. KKR and its co-investors lost the entire 1.1 billion euros in equity they had used to acquire Axel, along with hundreds of millions more injected during two separate debt restructurings. Raleigh had reported losses of $30 million in accounts released in 2025. Redundancies had already hit the brand in 2024. A proposed takeover by Singapore-based Dutech Group through its subsidiary TriStar, fell through earlier this year. And now, 139 years after a dozen workers started building bicycles on that Nottingham side street, the brand's future sits entirely in the hands of court-appointed administrators. The collapse is not just a Raleigh problem. European bicycle manufacturers across the board have been hammered by weaker consumer demand, rising costs, and relentless price pressure from Chinese competitors flooding the e-bike segment. Axel's insolvency pulls in not just Raleigh, but also Lapierre, Highbike, Baboy, and several other brands under the same corporate umbrella. Schwinn's corporate parent, Pawn Holdings, remains solvent for now. But the symmetry is hard to ignore. Both brands, one built on American soil and one on British, are now ultimately controlled by Dutch holding companies. Both manufacture their bicycles in Asia. Both compete in the mass market retail tier. The rivalry that once reflected two countries' entire relationships with cycling has been compressed into two logos on two corporate ledgers, separated by a few hundred miles of North Sea. Schwinn was founded in Chicago in 1895 and dominated American cycling for most of the 20th century. The Stingray, launched in 1963, sold tens of thousands in its first year and effectively invented youth cycling culture. The Varsity became the most widely sold derailleur-equipped bicycle of all time, with nearly 2 million units. Schwinn went bankrupt in 1992 and again in 2001. The brand is now a mass retail product owned by Dutch conglomerate Pawn Holdings. Raleigh was founded in Nottingham in 1887 and grew into the largest bicycle manufacturer in the world, producing over 4 million bikes annually at its peak. The Chopper, directly inspired by the Schwinn Stingray, sold 1.5 million units and became a generational icon. Manufacturing left England in 2002. As of August 2026, Raleigh's parent company Axel Group has entered insolvency proceedings after KKR's €1.8 billion acquisition collapsed. The Schwinn versus Raleigh debate was never about which bicycle was objectively better. It was about which country's version of cycling culture felt more real. American kids wanted the Stingray because it looked like a hot rod with pedals. British kids wanted the Chopper because it looked like something that might actually be confiscated. Both bikes were heavy, impractical, and just dangerous enough to be thrilling. Both were perfect. The uncomfortable conclusion is that brand loyalty in cycling has always been driven more by emotion than by engineering. And when the factories close, when the manufacturing moves overseas, when the founding families lose control, and when private equity writes the checks, what remains is only the emotion. Whether that alone is enough to carry a brand name through another century is the question neither Schwinn nor Raleigh has yet answered. As of this week, one of them may never get the chance. If this breakdown was worth the time, subscribe for more deep dives into the bikes and brands that shaped cycling history. More are already in production.